Right, so welcome to our annual members event and AGM. It's good to see one or two new members and some very well established members here as well for the next hour and a half or so. It's the second year that we've done this, and as everybody recognises, the first time you do it, it's an innovation and it'll never work. And the third time you do it, it's a tradition and you have to do it again. So we're in that nice sweet spot of the second time this time just to assess after this as to whether this is a good pattern for the future. The structure of the evening is twofold really. So for the first 30 to 45 minutes, we're very glad that we've got Rob Toomey here, who's going to give us a good news story about type for the next half an hour to 45 minutes. And then there'll be a short break, and then we'll move into the annual general meeting, which hopefully is also going to feel like a good news story, also for about 30 to 45 minutes. And in that part, obviously, we'll have the statutory reports that we need to have, the AGM business, elections, and a members forum at the end. So plenty of chance to ask and answer questions at that point. And then I'm very happy to stay on afterwards if anyone else wants to just chat. Rene, you have your hand up.
Yeah, because there's a second good news from Rob, which he's and his team are certifying my team of HR people globally to use TypeCoach. So I'm really excited about that.
Great, excellent. Rene, you might just say a word for those who don't know as to what your professional role is, then, just so people know what that means.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, I'm CHRO at Sunstar, which is a Japanese family-owned company active in oral care. So we do, toothpaste, toothbrushes, but we're well known in Europe for the interdental picks of the gum brand.
All right.
And also some products for the automotive industry and motorcycle industry. A lot of adhesives and sealants that go in your car that you don't realize might come from us, to
Right.
keep your windscreen and your dashboards and your panels on your car and whatever together.
Right. So big global company that's certifying with TypeCoach.
Half of the people in Japan, so we're pushing the envelope there as well, and
Yeah.
working with also Harumi and all of that. Anyway, over to you.
Great. So, first part then, Rob, many of you know Rob already as founder and president of TypeCoach, who's one of our corporate partners introduced in the last year. Great supporter of BAPT and of innovation around psychological type globally. He trailed some of what he's going to talk about tonight at Copenhagen, for those of us who were there, I think. And he'll be back with us again in Oxford in the conference in the autumn. And Rob is going to tell us more about an intervention delivered at Harvard and its impact. So a great story about the effectiveness and usefulness of the type model to encourage us all this evening. So Rob, over to you.
Well, thank you, Jerry. Wonderful introduction. It didn't go on too long, which is helpful for me. Great to see some familiar faces and some new faces. Thank you for entrusting me with the next few minutes. And Renee, let's go full circle. So this was 2014 in Greenwich, where Renee and I met at the BAPT conference, where I was giving a keynote. And this was the future of type back then, now 12 years ago. And I looked down on my phone and someone had just requested to connect on LinkedIn. I was like, isn't that the guy sitting over there? And that conversation then led to dinner, then led to an introduction to his employer at the time, which was Procter & Gamble, which then led to more than 200 people getting certified and more than 27,000 of their employees going through the TypeCoach tools and training, which is a remarkable legacy that we should be very proud of, Renee. So anyways, just a fun point. And I want to make two other sort of housekeeping items. The first is all graduates of the TypeCoach certification are now going to be told very vigorously that they need to join BAPT. And they're getting a discount that Jerry has arranged. So my hope is that the 300 or 400 people that go through our certification every year, a significant chunk of them will at least strongly consider, if not join, BAPT. And the reason for that is because I believe that BAPT is the beating heart of the psychological type community. No disrespect for the other groups, but this is where the action is. And to be entrusted with the heart of the heart, so to speak, this audience means something to me. So I don't anticipate being very formal today. I have a story to share that I'm excited to share. But I would welcome you all. I've got the chat here up. If you've got a question, just unmute, or as Renee did, just raise your hand. and I would be more than happy to stop and divert to whatever is on your mind. So without further ado, then I'll share my screen and dive into some of the things that I'd like to cover today. And yes, I am looking forward very much, Sue, to Oxford. So I've put up the call to action here. We've been telling our network about it. We've been trying to invite not just our UK and European clients to it, but September is a lovely time to be in the UK, and anyone in the US should be thinking about it as well. So hopefully we'll be pushing that boundary. So by way of background, so TypeCoach, for those of you not as familiar with us, we like to think of ourselves as an adaptive communication system. So somewhat unconventional in the context of the traditional approach to utilizing typology. We like to think of ourselves as the first in a new category, which is flipping the use from helping Rob learn more about Rob to how can I interact with others based on this information, which I'm always happy to have a lengthy discussion over a glass of wine in Oxford about the choices that led us to making that switch from the more traditional approach and what we've found comes out of it. Today, what I'm going to talk about, as Jerry indicated, is some new news that came out of a project that we did with Harvard Business School. So we've done a lot of work with Harvard as an organization over the years, but this is really our first call to the upper tier, so to speak. We were asked to train the entire first year MBA program, which comprises 960, almost 1,000 students, as part of what they call their field immersion program. This is the crown jewels or the signature program of the first year MBA experience, where they take all of these students and they separate them into 6-person teams and they send them off to 16 different countries for a 10-day immersion. And that immersion essentially is working closely with a team at a real company on a real business challenge, but they're jet lagged, they're stressed out. This is the chance for them to employ a lot of the things that they've learned in the classroom, but now they're in a real world context. You would not be surprised to learn that the students at Harvard Business School tend to have rather strong egos. We found that in our conversations about prior year's challenges, it's often a former Marine who's locking horns with the former McKinsey leader, because they both are accustomed to having people just listen to them because that's how it works. So what do you think? Did they find it easy to collaborate and communicate with one another? Absolutely not. One of the professors was joking that each year they advise the students to elect or appoint a leader within the 6-person team and avoid shared leadership. That's one of their very clear watchouts. And yet 3/4 of the teams elect to go with shared leadership. And as no surprise, there are issues. So the year before we came onto the scene, which was 2024, the year before, 45 of the 158 teams on this learning experience actually broke down to the point where a faculty member had to intervene and get the team back on track. So you've got the world's best and brightest in this remarkable learning experience, and they have to call for the teacher because they can't finish the assignment. They're at each other's throats. So obviously the school recognized that that's a big issue, brought us in. So in 2025, we did our whole thing, which is our approach to training is to weave in online tool access and resources that they learn from before they arrive into a classroom setting. And it's a rabbit hole, but I'll share it in a second. I then facilitated 3 sessions for the entire first year MBA program, teaching them how to spot someone else's personality preferences based on clues and behavior, and how to adjust. So how can you see whether someone's more on the introvert or extrovert side, and then what do you do with that information? We also provided them with our team report, so each 6-person team could see the distribution of types within their team and access the recommendations we make based on the psychological composition of the team. And then we worked with the school on something that I'm going to share with you a little bit more in depth tonight, which is scenarios that relate to specific issues that the teams had faced in the past. And so the goal was to go right after the issues that they had encountered many times before and see if the elements of typology that we introduced were a solution. So I'll go off script for a second because I know I'm talking to a number of you are facilitators and have been in front of audiences before. So The original plan with HBS was to get their faculty certified so that they could then deliver the content in the classroom. It is not the school's policy nor practice to invite people who are not faculty members to present to their students. In the past, when they've done so, they've received very clear feedback from the students. Why aren't the faculty teaching us? Why do we have some person, right? Well, the judgment of the leadership team for this program was such that they did not feel confident that the faculty were going to be able to achieve a level of mastery in the subject matter to deliver it effectively. So at the last minute, I was informed that I would be facilitating to all 960 students simultaneously via Zoom. And so again, behind the scenes, that meant that there are 16 classrooms with all the students in there. I'm in my office here in Sarasota, and they beamed me into each of those different classrooms. But as a facilitator, the difficulty was I could not see anyone. I could only see the backs of the heads of one classroom. So I couldn't see nodding and smiling. I couldn't see shaking and frowning. I couldn't see any feedback at all. And yet I had to deliver to 960 students, another 70 faculty and staff. So more than 1,000 people were displayed out there for me to deal with. So anyways, just a fun little rabbit hole to imagine. It was easily the most stressful facilitation I've done in the last 10 years. So anyways, as a result of our intervention, they tracked the data after the students went on the in-country experience and found that only one team required a faculty intervention. So we had been hoping for some, I guess you'd call like material or noticeable, significant impact of some kind. I would have been happy if it had gone from 45 interventions to 30 or 25, because we were the only difference from the prior year. It was just our intervention, our training, and our tools. So the rather extraordinary result of getting this down to one caught the eye of our colleagues at Harvard Business Review. As Jerry and Sue and a few others know, just yesterday, Harvard Business Review's podcast program, which is, they go by the name of Cold Call, launched a podcast interview with myself and one of the professors who led the whole program. So that's live, and actually I can put that up for you to check out. I'll just do this quick. If you are curious, this is the link to that program. And we found out yesterday afternoon, this is how real this news is. We found out yesterday afternoon that we're going to be featured in an article as well, sharing this 45-1 news. And really, my hope, and this is part of why we're having this conversation here with you today, is that this is a moment in time for psychological type, not just our little company. We have all struggled with objective ROI data to support the use of what we know to be anecdotally powerful, impactful solutions. And now, hopefully, all of us will be able to leverage this data point and say definitively, no, the only difference was the introduction of a framework that will allow people to communicate more effectively. So I'll pause there. I'm speaking a mile a minute. What questions, thoughts, observations? What's on anyone's mind?
Rob, were they a mixed age group, these people? Were they all a similar age range?
So the MBA program is mixed. You cannot apply directly out of university. So they all have anywhere from 3 to 20 years worth of work experience. So there's anywhere from your very late 20s up through your early 40s in the groups. It is an incredibly international audience, 60% from outside the US, and hailing from every possible corner. And of course, so the cultural differences are a significant element in navigating the communication piece as well. Thank you, Sue. John.
So, Rob, one thing that often impresses people in the world of business is how much things cost. So I guess, can they put a cost saving on how much the saving for 1 versus 45?
It's interesting, right? So being academics, they did not focus too much on the sort of value that offered to, I mean, obviously the faculty had a much easier experience in this case versus the prior years where they're running interference on all these teams, performing poorly. Then the other question is, what was the overall student satisfaction? Did that go up materially? And does that benefit the program? But I'll be candid with you, John. Like, I don't think the school really pays too much attention to that. So that's not the metric that they were looking for. But I will say that our two main champions of the program, the architects of the program, are two of the most senior tenured professors at the school. And for them, this is kind of like a return to how the school used to be from their perspective. Back in the 80s and 90s, one of the most sought after and well-respected programs was a course on interpersonal communication skills. And at some point along the way, the school lost the focus on that. And so they were partially excited to restore that, and then they were delighted to see that it actually produced real results. So for them, that the cup runneth over from an impact perspective.
Okay.
Now, I think commercially speaking, if we were able to produce the same results in a company such as Sunstar, for example, the commercial impact would be significant.
And even for Harvard Business School, you have a vague idea of how much these people are paid, and how much time they're saving. So there's something notional there, even if it's difficult to pin it down.
Yeah, absolutely right. Well, maybe this year we'll try to track that. What's been fun for me is their openness to working with us as real partners, as opposed to just treating like some vendor off the street. And so it has been a real collaboration. Renee, you have your hand up.
Yeah, congratulations. That's amazing. What I'm curious about, and maybe it's too early yet, because these people, after they graduate, they go back to, fairly senior positions in big companies. And have any of them called you to come and work in their new company?
They haven't graduated yet, or maybe, I think they graduate maybe next week. So this was the first year program of a 2-year program. So this would be the completion of year 2. But my phone is ready and available to be ringing.
Better make sure we finish our program before you're unavailable.
Yeah. Thank you. Great question. Jerry.
Just circling back to the insistence that these groups had on collaborative leadership. I mean, just to spell it out, presumably that is because nobody actually wants to give up the potential of them leading.
100%. Yes,
Yeah.
they all think that by delaying that choice, they can claim that choice later.
Yeah.
Right. Or that they'll just exert their own leadership, and then of course you have this inevitable clash. Yeah. All right, excellent questions. I got more, don't worry. So here we go, back to it. So for practitioners, we covered both the preferences and the temperament. Now, the format of delivery was, although suboptimal in some ways, they're working in their 6-person teams, and so the discussion actually was, I think, very effective. So when we finished the extrovert introvert segment, for example, which is, how do you spot whether someone's an extrovert or an introvert based on observable clues, they were having a discussion within their team about what this would mean in terms of that team composition. So we always talk about the wiring differences between the extroverts and the introverts, where the active thinking stimulates the talking for extroverts, whereas the introverts do their best thinking when they have a chance to reflect, whether that's a millisecond pause or a 3 or 4 second pause where they're going inside to reflect. Well, that's going to drive real dynamics within that team, and so there's a healthy discussion for them to have sorted out before they get on a plane and fly to who knows where. And then things like the 2 to 48 hour rule, which is one of our sort of chestnuts that we teach everyone, which is, in our estimation, talking to introverts, when do you do your best thinking? When you have a complex topic thrown at you. So I don't mean what do you have for breakfast, but where do you see this organization in 18 months? And the consensus coming back to us somewhere between 2 and 48 hours later. So how do you incorporate that into your meetings amongst your 6-person team? So those are the kinds of conversations that came out from the introduction. But I'm very pleased to say that we were able to introduce the 4 temperaments as well. That is something that is essential for, again, a practitioner point for all of you to consider. We have seen very clearly that if organizations only invest sufficient time to teach the preferences, the organization will eventually divert to another model. We have found that the temperaments is the best anchor for us to ensure that our clients remain with us in perpetuity. So we can almost predict this out of the gate if they, we just want to do the preferences. We have now learned to say, well, then we don't really want to partner with you because it's not going to work out long term. And that's a practice point for all of us in the type community, which is just hard truth, right? I wish that the preferences by themselves were sufficient for a company to be using the type framework forever. But there's something magical that happens when they make the additional commitment to the temperaments. And that certainly was the case for this group. Understanding the core values at the heart of the conflict allows you to navigate it more effectively because you understand where that person's why is coming from. We also gave them a very compressed version of our stress program. The faculty were clear that the students do experience stress. The way we articulate this in the context of interpersonal communication is when we get stressed, we forget to flex and we go back to our home base and we approach others with our preferred style as opposed to what that person needs. And so the other fun thing about stress when we introduce it is the person who's likely to see their stress level increasing the least is the person whose stress level is increasing. So empowering your teammates to see that you might be edging out of what we call the green zone into the yellow zone is helpful because that person's going to be the early warning sign for you and vice versa, as opposed to you being the sole controller of that experience. So one question you're likely wondering about is what was the level of skepticism? So I'll pause here, take off screen and just talk about this. So in order for this program to come about, I had to clear one of the most significant hurdles I've ever had to clear in my professional life, which was getting the faculty to support this in the first place. So while I had the champion, Len Schlesinger, who you'll see referenced on the podcast, he's the architect of the program, he's the senior most professor within the school, he makes decisions about who's hired and fired within the faculty. He carries a tremendous amount of weight. You still have to convince tenured faculty member to support this program. And so Len threw me to the wolves. He said, we're going to do a 3-hour program. You're going to teach them everything that the course covers. And that was easily the most rude, opinionated, and obnoxious group I've ever worked with. And Len would perfectly support me with that characterization. And I know we're recording, so that will live in perpetuity. They were not in any way inclined to support this. And the nature of the skepticism was almost entirely wrapped up in the legacy perception of the framework. Right. So again, this is another place where we as practitioners need to be realistic. We can't simply say we're talking about personality type without dealing with head on the associations that people have with that terminology. So the primary way, and I'm going to put a link in here to a Dropbox folder with all sorts of resources. And included in that list is the FAQ that we wrote for HBS, which I'm particularly proud of because it almost single-handedly extinguished the concern the skeptics had. Did the students still arrive with some legacy skepticism? Yes, but it really was go back to the FAQ, read it, and tell me if you still have a problem. So that was a very carefully curated and created document. I'm sharing that with you here. I'm also sharing with you, and I ask that you don't distribute them, our stress book, as well as the scenarios that I'm going to touch on in a second, as well as a document that allows anyone who's been through our program to identify someone else's preferences and temperament based on clues and behavior. That'll be useful for us later. So anyways, the way that we got around the skepticism was primarily by avoiding the use of the words personality type in combination. And I think that in part, generationally speaking to this particular audience, the word personality type is too broad. And it encapsulates, just by common parlance, way too many variables. And so as a result, they feel as though they're being pinned or pigeonholed or put in a box, all the things that we have to talk about as practitioners. By simply saying these are cognitive preferences, and we're talking about the 4 temperaments, you dodged all of it. I'm not talking about your personality type, I'm talking about your cognitive preferences. And that terminology really was the saving grace for the whole thing. I did not have the luxury of that when I was presenting to the faculty. That was a subsequent learning. So the faculty piece was really rough. And there's a whole sort of backlash. I don't know if you've all been in the spot where you've had the wrong champion and you've been swept away because that person just didn't have the horsepower or wherewithal to push through. We had the horsepower behind us. And so the foremost vocal faculty member who sort of spoke up against using this approach, I had the backstory conversation with Len afterwards. He's like, I promise you, Rob, we've heard it from them about other things before. This is not you, this is them. Anyways, it was really helpful for us to have the push behind us that we needed to get past that that initial piece. Renee, please.
Did you also face any elitism, meaning you don't have the same number of PhDs than they have, therefore how could you possibly teach them anything?
From the faculty,
teachers, yeah,
absolutely right. Yeah, no, the faculty. I mean, again, these are tenured people. It's very difficult to fire them. They don't have to be polite, and so it's actually kind of fun to debrief it after the fact because I knew exactly what they really thought, and that's uncommon because usually people are polite. So yeah, no, I got every possible sense of that. A few people stayed on afterwards, after I had delivered the content, and this is the distinction, and said, I retract my skepticism because if we land this correctly, it will actually be useful. And so the skepticism was sort of a crusty outer layer. Once we pierced that, they were able to be open to and accepting of the fact that this is actually useful. And so the initial piece was the hard part, and then we broke through. Now, as far as the students were concerned, because I think it's also a good question there, the primary heat that we took was that I'm not a professor, right? They didn't like the idea. It's not about whether I was a good facilitator or not. It's like, how dare you? And I'll share with you one little behind the scenes thing. So I found out the day before when we were doing the tech check that I asked the techs, I said, well, so how do you typically do this? And they confessed that the school has never done it before, to have one person outside the organization streamed into all 16 rooms. And I did not tell Carly or anyone else on my team because I knew that they would lose it. Like Carly, ESTJ, I don't think she would have slept a wink knowing that we were trailblazing in this sort of unique technological way. And I was thrilled. I thought that was one of the best parts of the whole thing. Yes, Sue.
Oh, just a couple of questions that are in the chat there, Rob, which was there any significant gender difference in the groups that you had at the 960?
Yeah, no significant gender differences. Then the over representation of any preference. So there's an answer there, which is yes, you had a much higher percentage of thinking and judging types. And then to the extent that people switched on a preference, it was almost always EI and in favor of moving to introversion from extroversion. So I take that as a signal that people wanted to score themselves on the E side. We even saw this with a couple of the professors. I think we're seeing that, even though our approach to verification is very different than the traditional approach, you'll still have people aspirationally answering as opposed to truthfully answering. So we saw a couple of professors, fess to, well, I'm probably more of an introvert as I think about it. Now, all of that's healthy, but the distribution was closest on SN, and then EI was probably 60-40 extrovert to introvert. And again, I think more people, there's probably an extra 5% we could squeeze out on the introvert side. Thank you. Other questions? All right, we've handled the skeptics best we could. All right, so this is a really fun thing, and I give so much credit to Len, who's the primary person behind it. When we did the scenarios, we'll actually walk you through one of the scenarios. He instituted what he calls a forced failure. So the scenario that we built described two characters in sufficient detail that after you've been through our training, you could create a good, reasonable hypothesis for the cognitive preferences for the two individuals involved. We didn't get into temperament in this particular scenario. However, Len knew that if you had them go through the exercise, the students would at the end say, well, I already knew how to do that. So he forced them to go through the scenarios without the personality clues embedded. And what this forced them to do is rely on the context of the situation. So Hannah, one of the characters, is from the Netherlands, and she's from a former Marine. So, all right, we can start to make assumptions about that, and they're pulling from the context, about that person, but not the cognition. And that was the light bulb that we were trying to turn on. So literally, the school invested 30 minutes in the classroom handing out these scenarios without the type clues and watch them fail, because there's no way that you could solve the challenge represented in the scenarios with the information provided. And then they did it again, providing them with the actual typology clues baked in, and they were able to resolve. I actually think that this is brilliant when you're working with the people who think they're the best and the brightest. Letting them falter deliberately created a tremendous difference in their urgency for learning. And also, I think, impacted the scores afterwards, which is going from I knew this already to now I see why I needed that. So kind of a fun little thing there. So if you're up for it, what I'd like to do is actually walk you through, I think, the best fit scenario for this group. So are we cool with that? All right, I'm seeing thumbs up from all the right people. So this is night 2 in Hanoi, and this is pulled really from prior years' experiences where exactly this kind of challenge emerged. So they're day 2, they're still jet lagged, they're in a foreign country, and the team is working together. So I'll give you a moment to read this, and then we'll move on to the next piece of it. Unless you'd like me to read it, I can read it. All right, I'm getting some thumbs up. All right, so that's page 1. I'll give you maybe 2 more seconds for those of you. Page 2. So what's cool about this is that at the end of their 10-day immersion, they present their findings to the leadership team of a real company. So in this case, the Wong Corporation is real leaders are going to sit down and say, what did you find out? And that adds stress to it because now they're presenting to real people, primarily former Harvard Business School graduates who are now bringing them in because they think it's a great learning experience. All right, so then earlier today, things between Hannah and Willem went in a negative direction. I'll let you read it again. All right, thumbs from John. Couple others. All right. So what I'm switch over now to the PDF of this, so you can read. So right now, what's fun is that as practitioners, you can already start to feel what the likely tensions here are in terms of the personality clashes, right? So you've got, Hannah, Willem. You can see there's cultural differences, right? And at this point, the students were asked to solve for the solution based on simply geographical background and prior work experience, which was not going to be sufficient for this particular challenge. So I'll move over to my PDFs. So here's the more detailed version of Hannah. So this is where you're going to extrapolate your clues. So read closely and see if you can't figure out which 4-letter code we're trying to hide in this description. All right, and as you wrap up, make sure you just put down just a guess, right? There's no right or wrong here. I mean, well, there is, but we're not holding anyone to a scorecard. Just put down what you think the four-letter code for Hannah is. And then we'll take a look at Willem. I'm loving the chat, by the way. Thank you all. Great comments there. All right, people are putting their four-letter code guesses into the chat, so fire away. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to bring over. Didn't want to put up on the screen until we got there. We had three different scenarios. Day two in Hoinoi was the one covering the preferences, primarily EI and JP. So yes, you're correct. I'll make this just a little bigger. These are the clues for Hannah. And this is the stuff that was coming out organically from their discussions, which is, as a practitioner, delightful, right? Because they're now connecting a skill set, which is profiling, to unlocking the reasoning behind the underlying issue, and then proactively considering what you could do differently to avoid the outcome, right? Which is that's how you operationalize it if we do it right. And here's Willem, the clues for him. And I tried to deliberately pick geographic backgrounds that didn't have an obvious component. Like, you know, it's often the case that people will generalize that people from Germany act like thinkers, even if they're not, right? So I didn't want to conflate that unnecessarily. You can argue that the Hannah character with the Marines is going to accentuate the ESTJ, which is noted in the chat. Certainly true. But anyway, I tried to be as neutral as possible. I don't think people have a strong association with the countries chosen. It was also, as an American, important for me to not have anyone from America involved, because right now, the less we talk about America, the better, as far as I'm concerned. All right, thoughts, questions, observations. I'm curious to see what your perspective on this exercise is.
I think, you know, what works for me is a very practical case study that they can immediately relate to, you know, and I would have expected a lot of aha moments where they were already thinking about their team and the dynamics and you know, so I'm sure you're getting additional material every time you do it.
Yeah, that's exactly what we saw. And while it might be begrudging for them to admit that this is useful, they did eventually admit it. So victory was secured in the end.
Please remind them they're humans still,
I know.
not AI machines, and it's normal.
Can I hear from the? Oh yeah, go ahead. Fire away, Sarah. You're up first.
I'd be really interested to know because I think it's excellent and it's a case study and um and there's a degree of simplicity with it. How did that land, Rob?
So what's fun for them is they want to show that they're the best and brightest. And so completing the exercise when there's a challenge involved really did stimulate them. Um, I don't think there were any bumps and bruises because of getting it wrong, because they had to work within their teams to come to consensus. And when we do this, there's always a healthy debate where someone's like, "Well, I'm seeing judger and I'm seeing perceiver clues," and that's a healthy conversation because what we ultimately did in the third scenario is we had them profile leaders of the team to whom they were going to present their findings. And to realize that as a group, they need to factor in their audience from a cognitive perspective, not just from a context perspective. So they actually utilized it fairly quickly.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question? Because we obviously are MBTI or we are type practitioners, so we are more aware of the different types. So how were they able to, recognize the different types? Because obviously they weren't so familiar with them. I mean, knowing your own, but recognizing other people's. Did they have a sheet to refer to or something like that?
Exactly right, Sarah. Yeah. So they have a laminate that's in the Dropbox folder that I shared. In fact, let me see if I can pull it up here. Yes, here we go. I'll share this so you get a feel for what this document looks like. So this is a summary of the clues for each of the preferences. So actually, I'll make it a little bigger. You can get a feel for this. And in the training, what I did is I went through each of the preferences and said, all right, here's how we generally speaking think about this from a behavioral perspective. Here's how this shows up. So for example, on sensing and intuition, one of the best clues is actually speech patterns. And we find that sensing types tend to speak in short, concise sentences packed with lots of details. Intuitives tend to speak in longer, flowing sentences, giving you an overview, and often incorporating original analogies. So that's a great clue for spotting this behaviorally in someone else. We also noticed that on sensing and intuition, early on in the conversation, sensing types are asking the how questions. How long does it take? How much does it cost? How many people? So they're determining the feasibility of the idea through the practical logistical analysis. That's a great signal for that underlying preference. Whereas intuitives are more likely to ask, if we did this, where will it put us long term? So those are the kinds of clues that we cover through the course of the program. And then the same thing, and you can see this on the second page of the document, we cover the temperaments as well from a clues perspective. I actually, when we have the full opportunity to teach the course properly, we encourage people to start with the temperaments because it's a great shortcut. People have a hard time hiding their core values, and then you have 2 out of their 4 preferences fairly quickly, including sensing and intuition, which is often the toughest to spot. Yes, Sue.
It just seems amazing to me, Rob, that given their experience, that they didn't have any access to this kind of development and ability to build rapport by changing their behaviors and their communication style. Well, did any of the people sort of say, "Ah, yes, this reminds me of what I learnt in X, Y, Z," or were they completely new to this idea that they can, communicate, understand different ways of communicating from knowledge of self and awareness of others?
So I think that the vast majority had been through some form of self-assessment. So they'd been through a StrengthsFinder, a Hogan, a DISC, a Myers-Briggs, Insights, whatever. But no one had done the next piece, which is activating it into the context of interpersonal communication, right? Which, if you think about it, traditionally has been the last piece of the puzzle from a learning perspective. You have to go through a lot of work to help someone understand the fundamentals about who they are before you can then start to talk about the dynamics. And for the most part, we don't find a lot of people get there without a coach holding their hand through the actual application. So a team will go through, they get confirmation about who they are, but they're not entirely sure on how to activate it in terms of how do I deal with Sarah differently based on what I've learned. And that's we front load that. So that's the primary emphasis. And then the last piece that comes out of it is actually the self-awareness that they see after they've understood where they fit in the scheme of things. Renee.
Yeah, it was kind of a similar question, but more, did you have to detox people from incorrect understanding of or presentation of tools of, insights? So, oh, I'm a green, I'm a blue, or whatever, and they have no clue what that means, or they understand it incorrectly.
Yeah, we were very clear on the landing page that they were sent to take a fresh look. And to answer honestly is not the right word, but you know what I mean, right? To instead, because you're no longer in a corporate environment where you might be afraid of an evaluation associated with your answers. So take a fresh look was our encouragement. And again, anecdotally, we got feedback through the system that a number of people were like, "Wow, this is really different than how I've come out in the past from similar programs." So it does seem like there was some deviation from that prior stuff. We did not actually hear as much as I expected to in terms of, why are we doing this, or this is redundant with something I've done before. So whether they were deliberately silent or that, we didn't hear it, or whether they put that on some other feedback form, we didn't see it. And we'll often see that in other corporate contexts more frequently. Yeah, Jerry.
Yeah, just an observation actually that in a way your focus is it's presenting type in quite an extroverted way. It's about the impact in the world first rather than the internal sense of self. And I guess it's not surprising that kind of traditionally, historically, it's been the other way around because it's come from a more kind of therapeutic self-knowledge background from Jung right onwards. Whereas this is kind of flipping the whole thing the other way around and saying, well, what do we see out there and how is that useful first rather than second?
Yeah, so I 100% agree. And what's been interesting is, so if you combine that with the second element, which is we're also sensing first and intuition second,
Mm,
right? We're leading with a practical approach,
mm,
which will then lead to some perhaps conceptual understandings. Whereas
mm.
historically, type has led with you have to understand the hierarchy of functions before we can start to talk about how you might use this.
Yeah, yeah.
And I give full credit to Carly on my team, who's ESTJ. Sensing preference was like, well, the document that we're currently putting in front of them is insufficient in advising them on what to do differently on Tuesday than the workshop we gave on Monday. And that's been the standard that we've always adhered to, because she's like, if it doesn't satisfy her preference for sensing, then we know
Mm,
that we're losing 2/3 of our likely audience who are on that side of the equation.
mm, mm, mm. Yeah, right.
It's a fun observation that we practitioners get to make right behind the scenes. We one other thing that we did not, because like I like to take credit for as much as I can, of course, ENTP here, but certain things were not intended and still had a benefit. So we our pre-work is videos and animations that explain the preferences and allow the user to make an informed selection. So it's akin to a debrief with the practitioner. And we didn't anticipate the benefit that that was going to have adhering to the 2 to 48 hour rule for our introvert participants who
Mm,
come into our workshops now fully ready to participate, as opposed to coming in cold, being thrown a whole bunch of information, and then half their questions are emerging over the weekend once they've had a chance to process, especially something as complex as psychological type. So
mm,
I can't take credit for it, but we stumbled into it, and it's made a big difference in terms of our audience participation from that side of the aisle.
mm, mm.
Just back to that question, given the size of the group, what opening is there for any individual feedback if that is needed? Or does
It's a
that
great.
come into a following, follow-up?
Yeah, so that was one of the interesting questions we had too. And again, we believe that the ethical administration, even though our profiling approach is quite comprehensive in explaining the preferences, we want to make sure people have an outlet for further discovery. So yeah, with 1,000 people wondering, am I really a thinker or a feeler? So what we did is we built an additional library of explainer videos answering the most common questions that people had about whether they're on this side or that side. I think that went underutilized in this particular case because the school didn't really publicize it. It was on the same page of resources where the FAQ was and a few other things. But the students were also told that if you have a lingering question about your preference, you can go to a faculty member, you can go to a program coordinator, and ultimately you could come to me if you weren't able to resolve that. So I made myself available, and we didn't really hear much in terms of that. We also allow for users on our platform to go back through the system 2 additional times, just as a sort of it's included. And we did see a number of people go back after the training, which I took as a signal of they wanted to take a fresh look at their preferences and rescore themselves. So I think that's all healthy. But yeah, that's a significant thing because you can't sit down with each person before they leave the class and like, hey, do you have any questions left about your preferences? So great question. Yeah, thank you. Kusam.
Hi. It's very interesting, what your discussion so far. But I just quickly ask, at what point in the over the 3 days was it at the very beginning that they did their own profile? Was that up to the end? So they still did
Yes.
their profile at the beginning.
Yeah, so they do, we call it our verifier program. That's pre-work. It takes about 25 minutes to complete. So they were actually given that, I think, 3 or 4 weeks in advance of the first session because they have a lot going on. So they wanted to give them a really long window. Our best practice is 7 or 10 business days. So they all, and this is the other fun thing, we had in the corporate context with most of our organizational clients, we'll send 2 reminders and everyone will go through. We had to send 5 reminders to get the students to complete this thing because they're just not accustomed to doing pre-work to a classroom experience. But it makes a huge difference in terms of the level of action. So first the verifier, and then the first things that I say in our classroom is, I know you still have questions about yourself, set them aside. We're going to profile other people. We ask them to write down the list of 6 people they'd like to profile. And then as they get some practice doing that, at the very end, we'll say, now you have a better feel for the dynamics of each of the preferences. Go back and take a fresh look at yourself. And that's often when people see their preferences emerge more clearly. Sarah.
Yeah, I was just wondering if any of the other faculties at Harvard would be interested in this project. For example, I can imagine engineering or the medical school. Has that been mooted in any way by your faculty, professors, etc.?
So I certainly hope so. We actually do have a longer standing relationship with Harvard Law School. And we have a champion there, just a brilliant INFP who really has almost single-handedly changed the awareness of the importance of interpersonal communication within the legal industry. One man's impact is really quite measurable here because he sits in a unique spot at the Harvard Law School Executive Education Program, and all the people going through that will go through our programs. So we've had a good track record there. That being said, we were immediately knocked out from the Harvard Law School primary legal education, right? Because the students and the faculty supporting that program were not ready yet. We tried this for 4 or 5 years ago now. They were not ready for it, skeptically speaking. They couldn't get past the sort of legacy elements of using typology. They're going to call us now that they see these results because the legal teams have a much bigger issue in many ways because they've been taught a specific. I used to be a lawyer, so I have been through that experience. You're taught to think a very specific way, and as a result, you think you're right. And that's not a great way to start a communication if you're looking to reach consensus. So plenty of work to be done across the rest of the ecosystem. Yeah, great question. Well, I just had a couple other things I wanted to touch on. I sort of can't help myself once I get started. So here's what I wanted to touch on next. The observation from the faculty included a number of things as they sort of reflected back on it in the context of AI and the future of work specifically. And what the school's realizing, and I think this is correct for all educators to be thinking about, is that a lot of what the school used to teach will now be done by AI. And so the future of being a graduate of Harvard Business School is not going to be how well you can operate a spreadsheet anymore. It's not whether you can put together a strategic plan. Those things will be consumed by AI. They're in what me and a couple other people are calling the compression zone. The AI will end up doing that better than the humans can, so let the AI do it. And so what the school is realizing is, well, what's left is the interpersonal piece, right? So exceptional leaders of the future are going to be better at doing the interpersonal communication and human relationships than those who can't. And certainly more important than the technical things that AI can do, which I think is absolutely true, is consistent with my own experience, and is further exacerbated by the generation coming up who have spent most of their young adulthood staring at their phone. So they haven't had opportunity for nearly as many of the interpersonal interactions where this skill set is typically built. So that's a really interesting point, and I think a really great indicator for BAPT and the type community, because we can sit in the valuable space outside the compression zone. But I want to talk about the compression zone. I'm going to use something that's not type related. I'm going to talk about Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions framework. And the reason why I'm picking on this is because it's easier for us as type practitioners to see a different framework as it goes through the compression zone. If I go to ChatGPT or Claude right now and I say to it, hey, I'm dealing with the situation in my team that I think is related to Lencioni's 5 functions, can you advise? The answer is ChatGPT will give you an excellent answer. And you can provide it with context-specific information about like how old the person is, what the level of seniority is, how big the team is, what your industry is. It will factor all of that in. And there is no protection that Patrick Lencioni can have for his model, because models are not protectable in this way, and they are definitely in the AI already. You can't unscramble that egg. So then the question becomes for us, so because I think the Jungian typology, the 4 temperament framework, a number of related principles they're in the general mainstream. The AI can advise you. They can absolutely ask ChatGPT tonight, hey, my boss is an ESTJ, can you rewrite this email? It will absolutely do that for you. It can walk you through the hierarchy of functions in a very effective way. The dissemination of knowledge as practitioners is no longer going to be sufficient for us to distinguish ourselves from our AI counterparts. So I wanted to open up the floor, and maybe this is, a broader conversation we get to continue in Oxford. What survives, right? I think obviously the magic we can create in the classroom, working one-on-one to improve the dynamics within the team, people who have real lived experience where they've made decisions that had real stakes involved will exceed, and I believe continue to exceed, the capacity of an AI advisor. But we can't just stand there and spout off on information that people can find through other sources much closer to their fingertips. So I'd love to leave that as my final question for discussion. And then as a reminder, looking forward to Oxford in September, where I'm going to be talking about why there should no longer be any type monopolies. I'm not even going to say anything more about it because I want some curiosity hanging out there.
That's great, Rob. Thank you so much. As expected, really stimulating, insightful, and helpful. Thank you so much for taking the time to do that for us, and good luck with the way this all lands with the wider community and your business partners and so on. I should just say as well before we move on that TypeCoach is one of our corporate partners, as I mentioned earlier. If you are not a user of TypeCoach at this point and you are interested in using that with a team, there is a very generous offer that is there on the corporate partners page that you could take advantage of if you're a new user of TypeCoach. It's certainly one of the I use probably 3 or 4 different assessment tools, and it's one that I use a lot and really value. And just backing on what Rob was saying, I find that people come to the initial conversation, because I generally work one-to-one with people. If they've been through the TypeCoach process, they're much less likely to then change their self-understanding in the conversation. They come with a more grounded sense of their own preferences, I find, than with some others. So that's really useful. But great, thank you so much, Rob, for coming and for giving us that.